I want to say something to you before we do one other thing, and I want you to hear it plain. If you have ever stood in a dark kitchen during a long power outage and watched good food go to slime in a cooler you paid good money for, that was not your fault. You did not do it wrong. You bought the box they told you to buy. You drove to the gas station and paid for the bags of ice they told you to buy. You did every single thing the way it was sold to you, and you still lost your milk and your butter and a week of your own hard garden work to the flies. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because the shame you felt cleaning out that reeking cooler was never yours to carry. The folks who sold you that $300 cooler and the folks who sell you the ice to fill it knew exactly what would happen the moment the ice ran out. They were counting on it. And nobody ever sat you down and told you that for about $15, with 2 clay pots, a bag of sand, and the shade of a tree, our people have kept food cold with no ice and no plug for longer than this country has been a country. Now I want you to sit with this. Down at the garden center this morning, 2 unglazed clay pots cost me $12. A bag of clean sand cost $3. That $15 one time buys you a cold space that has no plug, no motor, and no bag of ice to ever buy again. It will keep your carrots and your greens and your butter firm and cold for weeks. It will still be working when your grandchildren are grown, because clay does not break down and sand does not wear out. And across town, a man is paying $20,000 for a whole house generator so that when the grid fails, he can keep one refrigerator humming, and he is buying 5 gallons of fuel a day to feed it, and when the fuel trucks stop rolling, that machine is a very heavy paperweight. That is the whole story of this video, right there in those 2 numbers. $15 against $20,000. One depends on nothing. The other depends on everything holding together. My name is Gideon Petersheim. I am Amish, and I farm here in Elkhart County, Indiana, with my wife Rebecca. I am going to be honest with you the whole way through, the way I always am, because honesty is the only thing that makes a video like this worth a minute of your time. So let me be honest right at the start, before I show you a single thing. What we are going to build today is not a refrigerator. It will not freeze ice cream. It will not, and I mean this with everything in me, it will not keep raw meat or fresh milk safe during a long outage. I will come back to that later, and I will be very plain about it, because that is the part that can hurt your family if you get it wrong. What this will do is keep the food from your garden crisp and cold and your drinking water cool when the grid goes down. If that is what you need, and for most folks it is exactly what you need, then stay with me, because I am going to show you 3 ways our people did this, and the first one costs almost nothing. I have gathered all of this, every old cooling method my family and my neighbors still use, into a small book over at GideonPetersheim.com so that you have it on paper for the day the screen goes dark and there is no power to look anything up. It is there if you want it. I will not bring it up again in this video. What I will do instead is tell you the truth about what these methods do and, just as important, where they stop. Because a method that you trust past its limits is more dangerous than no method at all. Now, before I show you how, I want to show you why. Because once you understand the why, every step after it will make plain sense and you will never forget it. The whole thing turns on one simple law of the world that costs nothing to use. When water changes from a liquid into a vapor and floats off into the air, it does not do that for free. It has to pull energy to make the leap, and it steals that energy as heat from whatever is sitting closest to it. A single gram of water, to turn itself into vapor, has to pull in around 540 calories of heat. That is an enormous amount of heat for such a small thing. The university folks call it the latent heat of evaporation, and they call the whole business an endothermic reaction. We just call it the reason a wet shirt on the clothesline feels cold on your back, and the reason a sweating horse cools himself on a hot day. It is the way the good Lord cools the earth every time a puddle dries. So if you can get water to slowly seep through the wall of a clay pot and then evaporate off the outside surface into a moving breeze, that evaporation drags the heat straight out of the clay and out of the air inside the pot, and out of the carrots sitting in there. The pot sweats, and a sweating pot is a cold pot. That is the entire engine. It has no moving parts. It cannot break. It runs on water and wind, and both of those are free. Now, this only works with the right kind of pot, and this is the first thing most folks get wrong. So, mind me here. The clay has to be raw, unglazed terracotta. When you walk into the garden store, you will see rows of pretty pots, painted blue and yellow, or the plain-colored ones with a hard, clear shine baked over them. That shine is glaze, and glaze is nothing but a thin coat of glass melted over the clay to make it pretty and keep the dirt off a porch. It looks nice and it ruins the tool completely, because that glass seals every pore in the clay shut. The water can never get through to the outside air to evaporate. A glazed pot will just sit there warm and wet, and your greens will rot inside it. You need the raw stuff. Run your hand over it, and it should feel like dry chalk and catch at your skin. Tap it with a knuckle, and it gives a dull, hollow thud, not a ring. Pour a spoonful of water on the outside and watch it sink in and darken the clay right away, like the pot is drinking it. That thirst is exactly what you want, because that is the water finding its way to the breeze. So let us build it. I went into town yesterday and paid for everything myself, so I could give you honest prices and not made-up ones. For the outer shell, I found a large unglazed terracotta pot, about 14 inches across the rim, thick and heavy, 2 hands to lift it. That one cost me $8. For the inner chamber, I found a 10-inch unglazed pot to nest down inside it, and that was $4. Then I bought a 50-pound bag of washed play sand, the kind they sell for a child's sandbox, and that was $3. Now hear me on the sand, because this is another place folks fail. It must be washed sand. Do not dig dirt out of your garden to save the $3. Field dirt is full of loam and rotting matter, and the moment it gets wet, it packs down into a dense mud that suffocates the whole works and lets no water travel. Clean sand stays full of tiny open pockets that carry the water along. I also brought up an old burlap feed sack from the barn, which cost me nothing because we save such things, and you can use a thick old towel just as well. And I dug a small handful of gray clay out of the creek bank to plug the drain holes. 8 and 4 and 3 is $15, one time, for a cold box that owes nothing to anybody. I will tell it slow. First, look at the bottom of each pot. Every garden pot has a drainage hole punched in the center, so a plant's roots do not drown. We cannot have that, because our cooling water would run straight out onto the floor before it ever reached the walls. So I take a thumb-sized wad of that gray creek clay and press it flat over the hole on the inside of the big pot, smearing the edges down hard against the terracotta until it is sealed tight. A wad of plumber's putty or a folded piece of strong tape does the same job. Then I do the very same to the little pot. Next, I open the sand and scoop about 1.5 inches of it into the bottom of the big pot and sweep it flat with my hand. I set the 10-inch pot down squarely on that bed of sand and look down from the top to center it. So there is an even gap, about 2 inches all the way around, between the wall of the little pot and the wall of the big one. Then I scoop sand and pour it slowly down into that 2-inch ring, working around and around, tapping the side of the big pot with the heel of my hand so the sand settles down tight until it comes up nearly level with the rim of the inner pot. That sand is doing 2 jobs, and I want you to understand the second one because it is the clever part. First, packed in tight, it holds the inner pot locked in place so it cannot shift. But more than that, the sand is your wick. Think of the cotton wick down inside an oil lamp, how it draws the oil up steady and even to the flame. This wet sand draws the water up out of the bottom and presses it evenly against every square inch of the outer clay wall, so the whole pot sweats at once instead of just the bottom. Now I take a pitcher of well water and pour a slow, thin stream straight into that ring of sand, never into the empty center. The sand drinks it fast, and you will hear a faint hiss as the water sinks and pushes the trapped air up in little bubbles. I keep pouring and walking the rim until a thin skin of water pools on top and no longer sinks away. The wick is full. Within 10 minutes, the outside of that big pot turns a deep, dark, wet brown, and if you put your face near it, you can smell wet earth. The engine is running. Reach your hand into the empty center after an hour, and you will feel the chill already settling in. Before I go on to the 2 other ways, and I promise you the third one costs almost nothing at all, let me pause and say this once. If you want to keep more than one afternoon's tricks, if you want to lower your bills and waste less and lean less on the grid every single month, Rebecca and I run a little community for exactly that, where you can ask the 2 of us questions whenever you get stuck. The link is down in the description. That is all. Now back to the work. Now, before I move on, I owe you the honest limits of this clay pot, because a tool you trust past its limits will let you down on the worst day. The pot lives and dies by the dryness of the air. Remember, the engine is evaporation, and evaporation only runs when the air around it is thirsty enough to accept the water leaving the clay. If you farm out in Arizona or West Texas, or you are living through a dry summer drought, this pot will run cold and steady all season long. And the folks who study it out in the hot, dry villages of the world have measured it, dropping the inside chamber 15 to as much as 40 degrees below what the thermometer reads out in the sun. But here in Indiana, in the thick of an August heat wave, or down in the deep south, you know what a heavy, muggy morning feels like, where you sweat just standing still because the air is already near full of water. When the humidity climbs over about 50%, the pot starts to struggle, and when it hits 80% or higher, the engine all but stalls, because the air simply cannot take another drop, and the clay cannot sweat. On those days, the pot will barely beat the outside temperature, and that is exactly the day you lean on your buried can or your creek bucket instead, which do not care one bit what the sky is doing. And you must feed the pot. Every day or two, you lift the lid and pour another cup of water onto the sand ring, because the moment the wick runs dry, the cooling stops cold. Now, the pot cooler is the one everybody has heard of, but it is not the only way, and honestly, it is not even the coldest way our people had. So here is the first thing they never taught you, and it is the oldest cooling machine there is. It is running water. If you have a creek, a spring, or even a steady drainage ditch on your land, you already own a cooler that beats any clay pot in the country. Groundwater and spring water come up out of the earth at around 50 to 55 degrees, and they stay there, summer and winter, because they carry the deep temperature of the ground with them. My grandfather kept a spring house, which was nothing but a little stone shed built right over the spot where the spring came out, with a shallow stone trough inside that the cold water ran through all day and all night. He set his crocks of butter and his jugs of milk right down into that running trough, and the moving water carried the heat away from them without stop. That water never quit. It did not need ice, and it did not need a plug, and it held things at a true cold, colder than the clay pot will ever reach. Now, most of you do not have a stone spring house, and I am not going to pretend you can build one this afternoon. But here is the poor man's version that you truly can. Take a clean 5-gallon bucket with a tight lid, or better, a food-grade crock, and sink it right down into a flowing creek or a shaded spring, in a spot where the water moves past it steady, and weigh it down with a couple of clean rocks so it does not float off. Put your butter, your hard cheese, your eggs, and your jars of leftovers down inside it, sealed up tight so no creek water gets in. That moving water will hold that bucket at the temperature of the creek, and a shaded, running creek in most of the country sits far cooler than the air above it, day and night, with no tending at all. The one thing you must mind is the seal and the current. If the water is not truly moving, it warms up in the sun and does you no good, and if your lid is not tight, you will lose the whole lot to the creek. But a moving stream is the closest thing to a real refrigerator that nature will hand you for free, and it never needs a drop of fuel. Here is the second thing they never taught you, and it is right under your feet. It is the ground itself. Go down 3 or 4 feet into the earth, below the reach of the daytime sun, and the temperature holds steady all year at around 50 to 55 degrees, the same as that spring water. Because it is the same deep cold. That is the whole secret of a root cellar. And it is why our people could keep potatoes and cabbages and apples and carrots all the way from harvest until spring with no machine at all. Now, again, I am not going to tell you to dig a whole cellar this week, but you can borrow that ground cold with almost no work. Take a clean metal trash can or a food-grade barrel, dig a hole in a shaded, well-drained spot, and sink that can into the ground up to about 6 inches from its rim, packing the dirt back tight all around it. Put a good lid on it and pile a bale of straw or an old blanket over the top for the last stretch. Down inside that buried can, your root vegetables sit wrapped in the steady cool of the earth, out of the heat and out of the light, and they will keep for months, not days. I want you to see the difference. The clay pot borrows the coolness of a dry wind. The buried can borrows the coolness of the deep ground. One works best when the air is dry, the other works no matter what the sky is doing, and between the two of them, you can cover almost any week the weather throws at you. And here is the third one, and it is the one I think is the cleverest of all, and it costs you nothing but a little attention at bedtime. It is the night sky. On a clear night, even a warm one, the ground and everything sitting open on it sheds its heat straight up into the cold of open space. Folks have found frost on the grass on a night that never dropped near freezing, and that is the reason why. So on a clear evening, set your jugs of water and your covered food out in the open, up off the ground on a rack, uncovered to the sky, and let them shed their heat upward all night long. In the cool, small hours, they will pull down well below the daytime air. Then, and this is the part you must not forget, first thing in the morning, before the sun clears the trees, you carry them in and wrap them tight in a blanket or shut them in your buried can or your clay pot. You have caught the free cold of the night and you are holding on to it through the heat of the day. Our people did this with their crocks for generations without ever knowing the science of it. They just knew a clear night gave you a head start, and a wise man took it. Now, whichever of these you use, we have to talk about the safety word plainly, because this matters more than anything else I have said, and I will not soften it. None of these methods, not the clay pot, not the shaded creek bucket, and not the buried can, none of them will safely hold raw meat, poultry, fish, or fresh milk during a power outage. Hear me. There is a temperature range between about 40 degrees and about 140 degrees that the food safety people call the danger zone, and it is called that for a reason. In that range, the bacteria that make your family sick double their numbers about every 20 minutes. The clay pot on a good dry day gets you down to maybe 50 or 60 degrees. The creek and the buried can might get you near 50. 50 is wonderful for a carrot. 50 is deadly for a chicken breast, because 50 is still deep inside that danger zone. Raw meat and dairy must be held below 40 to be safe, and none of these old ways reach 40 and hold it. So here is the plain rule, and I want you to write it on a card and tape it inside a kitchen cupboard where you will find it in the dark. When the power goes out, a full freezer holds its cold about 48 hours if you keep the door shut, and a fridge only about 4 hours. Once meat or milk has sat above 40 degrees for more than 2 hours, you throw it out. When in doubt, you throw it out. You do not smell it and take a chance, because the bacteria that hurt you the worst do not always smell. A ruined roast costs a few dollars. A sick child in a house with no power and no way to reach a doctor costs more than you ever want to pay. These clay pots and creek buckets are for the harvest, for the roots and the greens and the fruit and the butter kept short, and for your drinking water. They are not for the butcher's cuts. And if a long outage catches you with raw meat you cannot keep cold, the old answer was never to gamble on a cool box. The old answer was to cook it down hard that same day, or to get it into jars in a pressure canner if you have one, and turn it into something shelf-stable before it turns on you. Rebecca has done that many a time when a freezer failed, and I will show you that whole business another day. So now I have to ask you the question I promised at the very start, the one about that expensive plastic cooler and why it turns into a heat trap the moment the ice is gone. Because the answer tells you everything about who profits and who does not. Insulation, that thick foam and heavy plastic, does not make anything cold. It cannot. All it does is slow down the movement of heat. When the ice is packed inside, that foam slows the summer heat from getting in, and it works beautifully for a day or two. But the second that ice melts to lukewarm water, the very same foam now traps the heat inside, and it holds the warmth of your rotting food perfectly, sealed in a dark, airtight, stagnant vault where the temperature only climbs. The insulation works both ways. The clay pot wins for the exact opposite reason. It does not seal heat in or out. It breathes. It hands the heat away to the wind, all day and all night, and asks for nothing back but a little water. And there, I think, is the whole thing laid bare. There is a great deal of money in a $20,000 generator, and in the fuel you must buy to feed it week after week, and in the $300 cooler, and in the bags of ice you drive to town to buy every single day of an outage. There is no money at all, none, in telling a man to sink a bucket in his creek, or bury a trash can in his yard, or set two clay pots one inside the other. Let me do the honest math with you, Plain, so you see it is not just talk. Say the power goes out for 4 days, which is about what my neighbor lost 2 summers back when the storm snapped the poles along the state road. To ride that out the generator way, you are looking at that machine. Call it $2,000 to $5,000 for a modest one, or $20,000 for a whole house unit, plus 5 gallons of fuel a day at $3 or $4 a gallon, so $15 to $20 a day, just to keep it breathing, if you can even find fuel, once the stations lose power and the roads are blocked. Do the cooler way instead, and you are buying 3 bags of ice a day at $4 or $5 a bag, better than $15 a day, every day, and only for as long as a store somewhere still has power to freeze it. Now the clay pot and the buried can in the creek. $15 one time for the pot. A few dollars for a used trash can and an afternoon with a shovel. Nothing at all for the creek, but a bucket you already own. Over a single bad outage, that is a difference of anywhere from $60 to many thousands, and over the 20 years these clay pots will keep working, it is not even a number worth writing down, because one side of it is almost zero. That is not about being cheap, that is about being free. The power company does not profit from a family that can keep its food cold without them, and it profits enormously from one that cannot. So the simple old methods sit quiet in farmhouses like ours, and the expensive fragile ones get all the advertising. Now, I am not going to stand in my barn and tell you there is a room full of men somewhere plotting to keep you ignorant. It is not that. It is worse than that in a way, and stranger. Nobody had to arrange it at all. The generator has a whole industry behind it with money to spend telling you its story, and the clay pot has nothing behind it but an old grandfather who is gone now and never sold anything to anybody. The bright expensive thing gets shouted, and the plain free thing gets forgotten, and no one ever had to sit down and decide it should be so. That is not a conspiracy. That is just who has a reason to teach you and who does not. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it, and you can be the one who never paid. So here is what I want you to do this week, and start small. Go to the garden center and buy the 2 unglazed pots and the bag of sand. $15. Build the cooler on your workbench the way I showed you. Plug the holes, pack the sand, wet it down, and give it a full day. Then walk your own land and find your cold spots, the way our people always did before they trusted anything. Find the deepest shade on the north side of your house or your barn, where the sun never touches the ground and a breeze runs through. That is where the clay pot belongs, never in a still hot garage, because dead air makes it nothing but a wet mud puddle. If you have a creek or a spring, find the spot where the water truly moves and test your sealed bucket there for a day. And take a thermometer, the cheap kind, and lay it inside each spot and read it morning and evening, so you know for a fact what cold you have to work with before a storm ever comes, instead of guessing in the dark when it is too late. Then come back and tell me in the comments what you found. I truly want to know. When the power goes out at your house, what is the very first thing in your refrigerator that goes bad? And how long did your last outage last? And tell me this too, because I am always gathering these. What county do you live in, and how old is your house, and does anybody in your family remember a spring house or a root cellar and what they kept in it? Those old family ways are exactly the kind of knowledge that vanishes forever when nobody writes it down, and the comments under this video are one of the ways we save them. I read every single one. Next time, we are going to take the natural next step after today, and I am going to show you the old way we cure and store meat with nothing but salt and time, so that a failed freezer or a long outage never again costs you a whole hog. It is the very thing I promised you when we talked about the danger zone, and it is the piece that makes a home truly ready. Until then, remember that the people who built this country with their hands, who kept their families fed through long winters and hot summers with no wire running to the house and no truck bringing the ice, knew things we are only just starting to remember. The good Lord bless you and keep you, and I will see you next time, if we are spared and willing.